Yo, what is up YouTube? It's your boy, Joaq. Welcome back to another video. Today, I'm going to do a much longer length film analysis than I normally would have, but I think that is totally warranted because today we're talking about Sinners. If you haven't heard about Sinners yet, I've been calling it the best movie of the year, albeit that was before Superman Together and Weapons came out. I haven't seen Weapons or Together yet. Together's a movie I've been most hyped about all year. I've heard insane things about Weapons. I'm dying to go see it. Okay, restraining the movie nerd, let's stay on topic. Sinners. I originally hesitated making a video on this. I felt the same way regarding uploading content around it that I did with The Accountant. I saw the first and second one with my friend Rob. I filmed a couple of rants in the car. I edited it and then sat on them like I usually do to reflect, and ended up not posting them. Ultimately, I felt that the conversation I was attempting to broach, the film's representation of autism and the neurodivergent spectrum through the lens of a dumb old head, Gran Torino way, sort of, was not a conversation I should be engaging in. Despite it being ADHD and generally neurodivergent myself, I've only been medicated for like 2 years at this point, and recognize that I can't really, also just don't really feel comfortable, speak on that kind of topic area from a lens that offers an important perspective. My analysis would be from the outside looking in to the autism world perspective, whatever. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. That's a long way to say that I wasn't going to comment on Sinners because I'm not black. Not that non-black people shouldn't speak on movies they like, especially when it's on a topic they're less familiar with, so they can share what they learned and hopefully continue to learn, because people totally should do that. But I'm sure that a lot of the analysis and observations that I would have made, a lot of other badass black content creators that I follow would have made those same comments, and probably even more, because of their perspective. This goes back to the outside looking in thing I was relating earlier. So with that logic in mind, I thought it best to just channel my excitement into the movie from yapping about it online myself, to reposting and watching and commenting on black creators who I really enjoy. Unrelated, shout out Foreign Friday, for no particular reason other than he's black, and I love his politics, and he's badass, and my wifey discovered him like last month. And anyways, okay, yes, Sinners. So why am I choosing to make a video on Sinners anyway? Well, besides hoping that you have the patience to let me get to my point, and hoping that the connection I bring up is interesting enough to have warranted a video, I had a school assignment, specifically a school assignment that taught me a lesson I needed to relearn with this Sinners perspective fresh in my mind in order to fully grasp the point I want to make today. Sinners and black capitalism, and how Ryan Coogler concludes that it, along with everything else, was always doomed to fail. Long ass title, peep the description if you want the video transcript, and the actual thesis too. Like all academic research assignments, I've got my example and sources ready, and like all modern academic research assignments, I've turned this thing into a podcast, presenting The Twins. Welcome to our podcast, A Walk to Remember. I'm your host, Joaquin Calavio, and today we're going to take a look throughout 3 eras of American history to analyze a uniquely American concept, black capitalism, and where it stands today both in the culture and in its efficacy. First of all, what is black capitalism? It might not be a concept all of our listeners are familiar with, and today I'm joined by the wonderfully talented Joaquin Calavio. Thanks for having me. Black capitalism broadly refers to the idea of black economic self-sufficiency through entrepreneurship, business ownership, and wealth building within the black community, but its roots are deeply political. The historian Mersha Baradaran does an amazing job outlining those political roots in her New York Times piece, The Real Roots of Black Capitalism, and she explains that the term gained national prominence under President Nixon in the late 1960s and early 70s. Nixon framed it as a way to address racial inequality without government intervention, encouraging black business ownership while opposing structural reforms like reparations or robust welfare programs. Nixon himself said in a speech, instead of government jobs and government housing and government welfare, let government use its tax and credit policies to power the greatest engine of progress ever developed in the history of man. American private enterprise. Black capitalism was eventually fostered and reemerged into Ronald Reagan's enterprise zone policy, Bill Clinton's new market tax credits, and Barack Obama's promise zones. But the philosophy predates Nixon. Think of Booker T. Washington's emphasis on black economic independence in the late 19th century, or the Black Panther Party's community-based programs. The tension has always been, is black capitalism a path to liberation, or a way to shift responsibility onto black Americans while maintaining systemic barriers? To understand the roots of black capitalism, we need to examine Reconstruction, the turbulent post-Civil War era when the U.S. grappled with integrating 4 million newly freed black Americans into the economic and political fabric of the nation. Central to this was the Freedman Savings and Trust Company, or Freedman's Bank, chartered in 1865. Joaq, how did Reconstruction's ideals shape this institution, and why did it fail so catastrophically? Reconstruction was born from radical hope, the idea that emancipation could be more than legal freedom. It could mean economic justice. Freedman's Bank embodied this vision. Its chief advocate, Senator Charles Sumner, saw it as a tool to dismantle the socioeconomic inequities of slavery. In a speech to President Lincoln, Sumner argued that the freedmen needed not just liberty, but the means to sustain it. His intent was noble: a federally backed bank where black soldiers and laborers could safely deposit earnings, build credit, and escape predatory lenders. But flaws lurked beneath the surface. Sumner's idealism overlooked structural risks. The bank's charter restricted investments to ultra-safe U.S. securities, but it lacked federal deposit insurance. Worse, its boards were stacked with Northern philanthropists like poet Willem Cullen Bryant, who never attended meetings, leaving management to unexperienced white elites. And the bank's advertisement preyed on this trust, didn't it? Absolutely. Ads in black newspapers like the New National Era featured imagery of Lincoln and eagles, promising security for the humblest. This messaging exploited freedmen's faith in the government. Many believed their deposits were federally guaranteed thanks to the ties to the Freedmen's Bureau. But behind the scenes, mismanagement was rampant. An 1870 charter amendment that was lobbied by bank officers allowed risky loans on real estate and railroad bonds, especially 19th century junk bonds. Then came the Panic of 1873. As historian John Steele Gordon notes, the bank's expenses were 10 times the industry average, with bookkeepers literally signing off on balances, errors and omissions accepted. And Frederick Douglass, brought in as figurehead president in 1874, called it a corpse. Yes, Douglass testified later that he'd known nothing about baking when he invested $10,000 of his own money, only to discover the books were cooked. By then, 61,000 depositors, many of whom were formerly enslaved, lost nearly 40% of their savings. The collapse wasn't just incompetence, it was a systemic betrayal. As NPR's Tony Mosley notes, this pattern, black trust met with white negligence, echoes in today's racial wealth gap. And the failure of the Freedmen's Bank reveals a troubling pattern of white negligence and exploitation. Joaq, how did mismanagement and deceptive marketing contribute to this historic financial disaster? The bank's collapse was no accident. It was the direct result of systemic mismanagement by white trustees. As John Steele Gordon's analysis shows, these trustees abandoned the bank's original conservative investment strategy, instead gambling with depositors' money on risky railroad bonds and other questionable loans. By 1874, nearly 60% of the bank's assets were tied up in these speculative ventures, leaving black depositors completely vulnerable when the economic crisis hit. And this negligence was amplified by deceptive, targeted marketing strategies, correct? Absolutely. Research by Saleri and Tak reveals how the bank's advertisements specifically targeted black communities with misleading messages. Ads in publications like the New National Era framed banking as a moral duty, urging freedmen to save the small sums while deliberately obscuring the bank's precarious financial situation. This marketing exploited the trust black Americans placed in institutions tied to emancipation, while the white trustees failed in their basic fiduciary responsibilities. So we see a pattern of white elites benefiting from black financial participation while failing to protect those very investors. Exactly. The trustees' negligence wasn't just incompetence, it reflected a broader pattern of exploiting black economic aspirations without providing real institutional support. When the bank collapsed, it wasn't just money that was lost, but trust in the very systems that were supposed to help freedmen build economic independence. We've just discussed how the Freedmen's Bank collapse represented a fundamental betrayal of black economic trust by white institutions. But in the ashes of that failure, something remarkable emerged. The first true incarnation of black capitalism. Tulsa's Greenwood District, better known as Black Wall Street. Joaq, take us back to 1821. What made this community so extraordinary? Greenwood wasn't just successful, it was revolutionary. as Hannibal Johnson documents in Black Wall Street. This was a fully self-sustaining black economy spanning 35 city blocks. We're talking about 300 black-owned businesses, including 2 newspapers, 15 doctor's offices, a public library, hotels, theaters, and even a bus system. Money would circulate within Greenwood for nearly 2 years before leaving the community. This wasn't just entrepreneurship, it was economic independence. And at the heart of this was the Tulsa Star newspaper, right? Exactly. The Star wasn't just reporting news, it was the connective tissue of this economy. Editor A.J. Smitherman used its pages to promote black business through advertising, document community growth, and challenge racial injustices. It prefigured what the Atlanta Daily World would later accomplish, with Harry McAlpin becoming the first black White House correspondent, proving black media could shape both narratives and economies. Prefigured, that's a good word. Which makes what happened next even more devastating. The 1921 massacre wasn't random violence. It was a calculated response from a white supremacist region that had had enough tolerating black existence. When you had this level of black success in Jim Crow America, white supremacy had only one response: terrorism. Walk us through the aftermath. What was the official response? The city's reaction tells you everything. No prosecution of perpetrators. Insurance companies labeled it a riot to deny claims. Victims were buried in unmarked mass graves. Compare this to how the government bailed out white banks during panics. The message was clear. Black prosperity would not be tolerated, and certainly not protected. And modern recovery efforts? As Tulsa's own commemorative materials acknowledge, symbolic gestures can't repair generational theft. Searching for mass graves in 2025 doesn't restore the 1.8 million in property loss, the hundreds of businesses never rebuilt, the generational wealth erased. So when we talk about black capitalism today, we're building on foundations that were literally burned to the ground. Exactly. Greenwood proved black economic ecosystems could thrive, but also revealed how violently they'd be defended against. That tension still defines the conversation today. All right, well, we've covered the betrayal of the Freedman's Bank and the tragic destruction of Black Wall Street. Now let's talk about today's landscape. We've got black billionaires like Jay-Z, corporate activism through Nike deals, and this whole modern black capitalism movement. Joaq, how should we understand this evolution? You know, it's fascinating because we're seeing this tension play out in real time. On one hand, you've got these phenomenal success stories. Jay-Z building Rock Nation into this entertainment empire, becoming hip-hop's first billionaire. He's become the embodiment of the American dream narrative through an art form largely pioneered by African Americans. But then you've got critics like Earl Ofari Hutchinson, who've been questioning this model since the 1970s when he wrote The Myth of Black Capitalism. Right, and Hutchinson just revisited this argument last year in 2024. What's his core critique? So back in 1970, Hutchinson was already calling out the faulty Nixon-era idea that black business ownership could solve systemic inequality. His argument was that capitalism itself is the problem. It's a system built on exploitation, and just having black faces at the top doesn't change that fundamental nature. Fast forward to his 2024 follow-up, and he's even more convinced. He pointed out that while we've got more black millionaires than ever, the racial wealth gap has actually widened compared to how the socioeconomic state of America was in the 1970s. That's a powerful indictment. But what about the cultural side of this? Like Spike Lee's films and his Air Jordan work with Nike. What's the impact of those kinds of projects? Great point. Spike Lee's films have always grappled with these questions. His Air Jordan campaigns with Nike in the 80s and 90s were revolutionary at the time, finally giving black athletes and creatives real corporate backing. But as James West wrote in that AAHS article, there's always been this tension between empowerment and co-optation. Like, is it revolutionary when corporations profit off black culture while still maintaining fundamentally unequal structures? So where does that leave us today? Are figures like Jay-Z and Killer Mike selling us false hope? I think Hutchinson would say it's complicated. In his 2024 piece, he acknowledges that black economic power matters. Tulsa proved that. But he argues we can't mistake individual success for systemic change. Like Aaron Ross Coleman pointed out in The Nation, when we celebrate these black capitalist success stories, we risk ignoring the fact that most black Americans are still locked out of real wealth-building opportunities. The system isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed. Powerful stuff. But no offense, These are all older black figures who have spent a lot of time and lived experience analyzing this. What are the streets saying? I've just seen this new film, already movie of the year, by this new up-and-coming director named Ryan Coogler, and within it, he kind of juxtaposes black capitalism in the form of these two characters, both played by Michael B. Jordan, named Smoke and Stack. Joaq, would you take it from here? Absolutely. So Smoke and Stack, I feel, reflect two important sides of the same coin. The coin being the perceived freedom that could be provided via black capitalism. Stack's freedom is of pleasure and not in a crass, just limited to sex and drugs and rock and roll way, even if it definitely includes all of that. But in a way, he wants to be free to enjoy life and be happy with the people he loves. Basically with the same freedoms that a white man had at the time. Exactly. Smoke represents a differing end of the spectrum. Where he fights, he pursues capital with the intent to create, to construct a space in which his people can all be free. He wants to take on that emotion, financial, physical, everything toll to make that possible. And he correctly recognizes, same as his brother, that to get that kind of political capital necessary to create and protect that space from a normally government-tolerated white supremacist threat, you need money to buy it. Wow, those are some powerful dichotomies. A wonderful character setup. I hope bro wins an Oscar. What do you think are Coogler's ultimate conclusions of those pursuits? Well, prescient throughout the movie was this awesome underlying theme that suggested that their endeavor was doomed from the start. Before their juke joint, which was the bar they ended up creating, even ended up getting attacked by vampires, Smoke and Stack find out that, in part because the local sharecropping plantations tend to pay wooden nickels and similar substandard non-government issued currency to the patrons coming to the twins' bar, they would be out of fresh cash in 2 months and their business would be doomed. The circumstantial and black code era laws highlight the skewed economic system that was never gonna let a couple of black people live sustainably. And that's all revealed before Remick, the big scary white vampire, drops the biggest reveal at the end of the movie, where Remick, in his last attempt to get the main characters to willingly let themselves be killed to become vampires. A symbolic throwing away of the pursuit of freedom within your own lifetime, as well as subscribing to the violent nature of the perceived white devil. And of course, obviously, the rejection of your humanity. That's right. And one of Remick's last modes of pressure he applies to the team to get them to feel that despair needed to get them to want to be vampires. He reveals that some of the vampires he brought with him were the nephew and niece of the clansman who sold the twins the land their juke joint stands on. The vampire acknowledges that him and his clansman father had already arranged plans to gather a mob of white supremacists to destroy the juke joint and kill everybody inside at dawn. Yet another instance of the twins never having a chance of succeeding through black capitalism. Perhaps that horrific ending, see what I did there, isn't quite so grim upon reflection. Coogler, in a podcast interview with The Last Podcast on the Left, related the political origins of what he was trying to suggest with his writing, and that Sammy, the main character of the movie in the end, rejects both capitalism and vampirism's perverted utopian alternative, and ended up pursuing a beautiful and fulfilling life anyways, having prioritized his dreams. At the very least, the system itself has to be rejected, and for people as individuals to be prioritized, kind of like Hutchinson's initial 1970 critique on black capitalism. Wow, full circle. And I guess the people have already begun to move in that direction. I hope the lesson we take today out of both this podcast and perhaps the recent Democratic primary of self-proclaimed Democratic Socialist New York mayoral candidate Zoran Mamdani is that as long as we both stay on the message of policy and trust our young people, then there might just be hope for the future after all. I'm Joaq, and this is the end of... What was this thing called again? I'm Joaq, and this is a walk to remember. Hope y'all enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun editing that, hopefully. I didn't know much of any of that black history and its deep roots to black capitalism. There's a podcast the wifey recommended me that I listened to called The History of the KKK and the Police. I got to explore, obviously, the history in a lot more detail, and I need to see, or listen rather, to the Tulsa episode. To the Tulsa episode ASAP, because it doesn't just remind you of current injustices. A whole fleet of angry white people can come crashing in, massacring people, and there isn't a single arrest or charge that sticks. Anyways, that historical perspective definitely reframes what Coogler was saying about capitalism and its efficacy. Period. Do you remember earlier when I said that the perspective I gained making this podcast assignment, thanks to my professor, helped prompt me making this video? Kind of confusing sentence. She failed me. I'm sure this is a story a lot of students can relate to. I had learned that the podcast, which was my final, mind you, was not in fact due at midnight, it was due at 5. I got off of work at 4. My heart started racing, and I talked to my supervisor, and thankfully, because of the grind I had been putting in that day for the tomato juice shipping, don't ask, I could log off a little early, wrap up the script grammar, and grab the wifey to film the video and get it all done and loaded by 4:38. I did get it all done and uploaded by 4:38. The video did not submit. Whether through cruel fate, the hand of God forcing me to see a lesson, or some other bullshit third reason I'm trying to think of to cope, the MP4 file did not finish processing before I hit the submit button. Well, that's okay. I mean, the video wasn't even edited, and it was kind of just to prove that you had the fluency to articulate your proficiency in your own podcast subject anyways. The script is really all you need. I pleaded. I called the chair of the department. I called the TA. We had an emergency Teams meeting. The professor makes the last decision. And realistically, they just didn't give a fuck. Before the nerds, derogatory, because I'm a nerd, and 65-year-olds like my dad get mad at me and take the teacher's side, because of course now there are sides and it's a generational / suck-up war. The whole point of this endeavor, taking classes, of becoming a student, of becoming a professor, of calculating grades and applying them as a permanent, unchangeable metric that future employers, colleges, and people tasked with authorizing you to access upward social mobility will refer back to and evaluate all of your potential merit on, is to learn. It's to grow. School is about passing down learned knowledge from thousands of years of recorded history. It is about adding to the shared history and knowledge and imprinting our own mark on that treasured culmination. One of the few things that separate humans from gods is that everything humans experience and learn has to be relearned every generation. Literally. Both politically and literally, this isn't academic glaze or nothing, bro. I believe this is an experience a lot of people watching this video can relate to, where for whatever technical or minute reason, ultimately the professor decides they do not feel like or they do not care enough to record your grade as a true reflection of effort and learning, but as a checkbox, because professors aren't incentivized to. The hyper-capitalist nature that we occupy has resulted in the assimilation of capital interest into every conceivable facet of existence, to where almost every institutional corporation is a bank with extra steps. You can take out a pay-in-4 loan with Papa John's for a pie you don't have the bread for. And they're about to reconcile that credit score with the OG one. And that's because hella of the payments made in Klarna are late anyways. We are so fucked. Stay on topic, Joaq. That's right. Given how even universities have become banking institutions subject to the whims of their shareholders with growing detachment from the lives of their students, shout out A&M. They don't even have, the president doesn't even live on campus anymore. And with dwindling support from universities to their own professors, bro, these teachers are all swamped. They're door dashing on the side, they're delaying their retirement, they're teaching at community colleges for that extra bit of coinage. We are just a number to these people. Their goal, like the goal of all production, is to get me in and churn me out as fast as possible. How I do during it and how I do after is not only secondary, but also not the responsibility of the professor or in the interest of the university, other than to show off that stat to incoming freshmen. What professor do you know even checks their Rate My Professor rating? Who cares? Who cares? That's for the students, not the professor. Buyer be warned, they paid for the class, you know? You should have known that there was no way you were going to be allowed to pass the class. My professor did not and does not care. I doubt they'd even watch this video all the way through, just like they wouldn't have watched that stupid unedited podcast of me blandly reading the script either, because she genuinely doesn't have the time to do all of that, let alone time to care about it. Scout, while I understand and empathize with the world we both live in and the tough situation we find ourselves in. You. That unfortunate reality is no excuse for the indifferent, willing, active, participating sabotage of someone else's life, even if it's trivial for you. You see, y'all, what Scout inadvertently taught me when reminding me that a lot of teachers really don't give a fuck was the importance that systemic apathy has in upholding the frame of capitalist inequality and the many ways capitalism tries to obscure humanity in doing so. Capitalism, by its very nature, causes everything to become an assembly line. Just think about it like it's fast food. The economic pressures people are under makes it so you're not ever gonna get yummy, feels like homemade restaurant food. You're gonna have to do fast food every time within the framework of those two examples. I'm not talking about buying perspective, by the way. I'm talking about the making perspective. If you are the chef in the kitchen, your rent is due and your mom's meds just went up again in price, and since she's unemployed and Trump just cut Medicaid, her insurance dumped her so that chef has no time to make yummy food. They're hurling that shit out like SpongeBob and the anchovies. The system is set up so that systemic apathy is inevitable. All facets of life, even education, are doomed. Finally made that sinner's connection again. I didn't get to talk about him as much as I wanted to on the actual podcast because I was short on time speed writing all of this. I've got time now here on YouTube. Thank you for staying this long. This is going to sound crazy. Zoran Mamdani might just be the symbol of a new economic hope that has an unprecedented mobilizing force within the American people. Who is Zoran? Zoran is the Democratic Party's nominee for mayor of New York, the biggest and wealthiest city in America. This might make some of the people in the audience who remember this laugh, but he is everything the Tea Party used to racistly say about Obama. He's a brown, Muslim, socialist, Arabic man who wants to radically change the face of the nation. And none of that was true about Obama, but that's a separate story. I want to move past the surface level identity stuff, but the reason I bring it up is because all of those identities and ideological baggage that Zoran carries with him did not matter in the end, despite racist attempts by the governor who did crazy shit like use AI to darken his beard to make him seem more scary and Arab. Like, they did not matter in the end because what came even before Zoran's face was his policies. Make America more affordable with outright socialism. Now, I know that's a scary word for a lot of you people here in America, especially given that we are living in the world after the Red Scare. Watch Oppenheimer. But socialism, according to Google, means socialism is an economic and political system characterized by social ownership of the means of production, as opposed to private ownership. It encompasses a range of economic and social theories and movements that advocate for various forms of social ownership, including public, community, or cooperative ownership. Socialism generally aims to create a more egalitarian society by addressing inequalities associated with capitalism. Yeah. Big yap sesh. Oh my goodness. Basically, what that means is that socialism is not about people becoming billionaires. It's about the government itself guaranteeing people the right to, quote unquote, survive through nerd poli-sci words like social ownership, which is a nerd way of saying, and this is an example, mind you, that you would own the right to healthcare, for instance, as opposed to the current US system, which is, oh, you don't have health insurance, fuck you, die. Anyways, back to Zoran. Zoran has become the face of socialism in America, and the importance of him becoming the Democratic nominee for the biggest and wealthiest city in America marks, hopefully, a new era of remarkable change. But there obviously is a lot of hurdles outside of freaks who hear socialism and freak out. There's a long way to go, but gotta end on a good note, so that's why I included the Zoran thing. And yeah, with capitalism, we're doomed. We've got to switch over to socialism, social democracy. Shout out Zoran. Get ready to pray 5 times a day, New York. I'm being silly. Hope y'all enjoyed. Check out the YouTube, check out the Twitch. Sage Walk on both. Peace out, y'all. Stop! Oh my gosh. I don't like this. They're gonna kill me right here.